Our guest today has impacted more leaders than probably anybody else alive. In fact, Inc. magazine named him the #1 most popular leadership expert in the world. Today, we're talking all things leadership with John Maxwell. What I'd like to do, John, is you've got so many amazing quotes that have impacted me. And what's really it is always interesting to think about how one sentence, one quote can change your mindset.
Of course.
And can open up windows of understanding and leadership. And so I'd like to go through some of your best quotes. And then I want to ask you specifically about your new book. And then we'll have a little fun with some surprise questions and a lightning round.
Okay, sure.
And so I've taught this and tried to explain it. And sometimes people try to push back. But I want you to unpack the idea that everything rises and falls on leadership. Is leadership really that important? And why do you say that?
It's really that important. I was 25 years old. I'm 73 now. So when I first heard that quote, that everything rises and falls on leadership, and I lived with it for 2 years. And when I say I lived with it, I wasn't sure that I embraced it, but I wanted to see if I felt that it was true. And the more that I would look around and see and experience, the more I realized it is true. Within a couple years, it became the catalyst for my passion to train leaders. In fact, when people ask me why am I still in the leadership game, it's that quote right there. I truly believe in every area. It doesn't matter whether it's government area, education, the church world, business world. I believe everything rises and falls on leadership. And I'm so passionate about it, even today. In fact, that quote, I believe that quote more today than I did when I was 25. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the beautiful things about something that really works is that the longer you live with it, the more you love it. And the more that you're convinced of it. Mm-hmm. And I've watched that principle and that quote come to reality in my life thousands and thousands of times with businesses I work with, just people. You just watch it happen. And what's incredible is once I realized this, and then I coupled it with the fact that you could learn how to be a leader. Mm-hmm. Because if you just stop on everything rises and falls on leadership, that can be kind of a reality splash after a while, because you look at it and say, well, if I'm not a leader, then everything's going to fall. But when I became convinced with that quote that you could learn how to lead,
right?
That leaders were not born, they could be made. Mm-hmm. And of course, then I wrote Developing Leader Within You 2.0. But those two quotes together are why I'm still in the leadership game, because we're watching people every day learn to lead. And when they learn to lead, everything gets better. No doubt about it.
Yeah, both those principles are hard to appreciate early in your leadership until you do it long enough.
Yes.
Then you start to really see that everything really does rise and fall in leadership. And then the second thing you said, that leaders can learn, they can grow, they can be made. You don't have to be born a leader. And that's really when it gets fun, is when you start reproducing leadership and you see others become great. One of the things you've always talked about is how important it is to care for your people, to motivate them, and to kind of compliment you. The first time we had a private meal together and meeting, I was pretty nervous. I was with John Maxwell, who's a hero, and you leaned in with a big smile and said something like, "How can I add value to your life, Craig?" And you just from the very beginning, you're with a guy who was a young developing leader, and you were trying to give and showed how much you cared. You always help value the person with you. The quote that you say that I like so much is, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Someone might say, well, leadership is business. You have to be business and to get results. You have to care about objectives more than people. How would you respond to that?
Well, my response would be that I think leaders get in trouble when they quit caring for their people. Mm-hmm. There's a very fine line, as you know, between manipulating people and motivating people. And I think manipulation is always wrong, because manipulation is where I move people for personal advantage. And so to me, that quote is so important because it's a safeguard. It's a safeguard in my life to keep me from crossing that line, which we all have crossed that line. I've crossed that line before where all of a sudden I thought, no, wait a minute. I just led that meeting and I came out as the winner. I'm not sure they did, but I did. And you know, when I say that leaders see more than others see and leaders see before others see, I can tell you, once you know that to be true, that puts a great responsibility on me as a leader to make sure that I never use that more and before for my advantage to the people's disadvantage. And so what's the balance? What's the checkmate on that? Well, it's very simple. You just care for people, not for people. And I say when you stop loving people, really do them a favor, stop leading them. Because the moment that I stop caring for you as a person, then I can promise you the motives of my leadership will go south very quick.
Right.
They just do.
What advice would you give, John, to someone who's maybe newer in their leadership and they say, okay, I do care for people, but I don't know how to express it. How does a caring leader show that she or he cares in a
great
leadership
question.
environment?
I always share that what you do, and this is by the way, that question you just asked is a very good question because there are a lot of people who really do care, but they don't emote very well,
Right.
and they're not visual very well. And so it's not that they lack it, it's just that they have never been able to present it. And so what I always share with them is, if that's your situation, sit down with your people and say, no, let me share with you the good news and the bad news. The good news is I really care for you, but let me tell you what the bad news is. I don't show it well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to help you know how I show it. I don't show it because I'm not bubbly and I'm not highly affirmative and I don't come around. I'm not like a cheerleader. But there are two or three things that I do that really show that I care for you. One is that I always respect you. And so you lay out whatever those things are and you just give them what I call those care markers. So that when they're following you, they don't need that emotional affirmation because they know that's not how you give it, but it doesn't matter because you've already shown them the way that you care. And I think that one of the greatest weaknesses that we have as leaders many times is that we take our areas that are difficult for us and we don't sit down with our people and say, no, this is very difficult for me. So I need you to help me. And I'm going to share with you why it's difficult. I'm going to share with you how you can understand it. And then I want you to also come in and say, John, maybe this would help. And would you help me? I think great leadership always is vulnerable and open and willing to be improved and has not only an open door policy, but has an open ear policy, an open heart policy. And I find people then migrate to that. I mean, all of a sudden they become your allies. They become some of the best help I've ever had is because I've sat down with my team and just said, I'm not really good here. So help me.
Yeah. Well, I like that. No, I honestly have never thought about that. Just sitting down with someone and saying, maybe I'm not as expressive. There might be some introverts right now.
Absolutely.
Or some people that they're not the loud person, the party person in the room, but they can say, what I want you to know is here's how I do show that I care for you. And that is that, I give you feedback or, I don't give you negative feedback, meaning I'm going to tell you if I do like it or something. And so you can, kind of clearly define here's how. And so, I served under a leader, John, that I never quite knew. And it took me years to figure him out. I never knew if I was doing great or not because he didn't show it. But his style of affirmation was so different. Had he explained it to me that this was a win, then I probably would have felt a lot more cared for earlier in the partnership. So
I had a mentor, Charles Blair, who many, many years ago said, John, always have an understanding so there's not a misunderstanding.
Right.
And it was just very helpful to me. And I asked him to explain that. He said, it's just very simple. He said, never assume, never assume, which is kind of like the mother of all leadership mess ups. Just so be vulnerable, ask questions, find out where they are, help them find out where you are, and then take off together.
I'm excited to ask you about this next quote of yours because we have a lot of listeners that ask questions that are very related to this one. You said leaders must be close enough to relate to others, but far enough ahead to motivate them. And so I want to ask you about both sides of that coin. On the close enough to relate, can you first of all describe that? And then I want to try to get into your mind and ask honestly, like, is there such thing as too close? Can you share too much?
Yes. That's a great question. When you talk about leading by example and being in front of them, but being close enough to relate to them, I always tell leaders, close comes first. Close comes first. I want friends. I don't want fans. And if I want friends, then I have to walk with them. And I want to walk with them. And so until I can make a connection with you, and until you can know that my connection is sincere, I will impress you, but I won't impact you. We impact people close up. We impress people far away. And so I always tell leaders, start with close. And the reason you start with close is because young leaders aren't good enough to be far ahead yet. In fact, when I was a young leader, I wasn't ahead of anybody. Everybody was ahead of me. I was 22 years of age when I had my first leadership responsibility, and everybody in my group, they were already ahead of me. So I never knew what it was. It took me a long time before I knew what it was like to be out front. But it didn't take a long time for me to connect with the people and know that I really cared. And so my leadership in the beginning was really a caring connection more than a competence connection. Now, obviously, if you don't develop that competence and get far out in front of them, then after a while, they're going to say, I have a great friend, but I don't have a leader.
Right.
And I have a lot of wonderful friends. I'm just not going to follow them, but I mean, they're just terrific friends. So I think the caring comes first because that's the heart. And, you know, people touch your heart before they ask for a hand. So I think that comes first. And then obviously you've got to grow into your leadership. But if the people care for you and you care for them, they'll give you space. They'll give you time. They'll let you mess up. I mean, they're your ally. Again, I tell leaders all the time, the greatest thing you could have is have the people that you love you, and always be there to help you.